We want to get some insight now from the United States, and we're going to reach out. Joining me now is Republican strategist Chip Felkel. Chip, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us on short notice. I understand you walked away from a dinner in a restaurant to speak to us. But tell me, what do you make of this move that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has gone to Mar-a-Lago to meet with Donald Trump amidst these tariff threats? What's your reaction when you heard that news?
Well, as one of your other guests said, I mean, I think again, I'm not going to get too far into Canadian politics, but it makes sense that Trudeau's got to go there and have a conversation. What I'm concerned about, and yes, I'm a conservative and a Republican, but tariffs have never been something that the conservative viewpoint of things were effective. That is Trump and Trump's on. I think one of the things that has to happen is that maybe a gut check reality is Trump just positioning himself. Many here would hope so, because we know that the people who are going to be hurt most by these tariffs are going to be, frankly, they're going to be a lot of his voters. They're going to be affected by it. He alone seems to be one of he and some of his biggest supporters seem to think that tariffs are a good way to do business, or to somehow, I'm not sure what we get out of Canada, one of my favorite places, but let's face it, you guys aren't sending thousands and thousands of immigrants across the border, or you're not doing what he's accused Mexico of doing. So I'm really not sure why Canada was even included in this. It should have been focused on China and Mexico and not our good friends to the north.
Well, Canada shares some of your puzzlement there, Chip, because, there are some people who say, yeah, he's got a point on a few things. But, the economic consequences of a 25% global tariff on imports makes no economic sense for anybody in the North American free trade agreements under whatever name they've existed. But I'm wondering, Trump has advocated for this. Robert Lighthizer, his former trade representative, has been a big fan of this. And the new USTR nominee was Lighthizer's chief of staff. So it seems to be part of the orthodoxy, at least in some of the people around Trump. What do you think he wants from Canada and Mexico to make this go away? I mean, what do you think it could possibly be? Because our border is so big and impossible to completely patrol.
I'm puzzled too, to be honest with you. I can see what he thinks he might get out of Mexico, but I cannot figure out exactly what he thinks the value is to our largest trading partner. I mean, first thing that comes to mind to me is what's this going to do to the housing market when lumber, of which we get a whole lot from Canada, when those prices go up and are then passed. Look, tariffs get paid by consumers, period. It doesn't matter who's doing them and where they're doing them, but those prices are going to get passed on to voters/consumers. And I don't know what it would be unless I've missed something. Do we want some of Saskatchewan that I'm not familiar with, or British Columbia that we seem to think we have a right to? Yeah. I really don't know.
Well, none of those. I'm not the premier of either of those places, but I think I can speak for them and say that they're not for sale, and no thanks. But I wonder, Chip, like you talk about how this is going to hurt American consumers, this is going to hurt American businesses, and that is the consensus amongst people who look at what the implications of this threat would be. But I spent a little bit of time in the United States during the election, and people didn't quite seem to understand how tariffs work. I don't think that's a unique to America thing. I think that's a pretty common thing with most ordinary people. But now we're seeing some domestic pressure from the business community, Walmart, the auto companies. Is that growing? Is that loud enough, do you think, to make a difference in the president-elect's thinking?
I mean, unfortunately, what we find ourselves with is someone who keeps his own counsel and who doesn't tend to listen to those around him unless they're agreeing with him. That was clear in the first Trump administration. I fear it's going to be worse in the second Trump administration because the adults are not in the room. The adults all got fired or left. And when we're dealing with someone as volatile and as, yes, I'm a Republican, but no, I've never been a big Trump fan. So by my next comment, we're dealing with someone who refuses to be told no on things. It's going to be a difficult battle. I mean, he campaigned on tariffs and immigration, and he's going to claim victory whatever happens in this dinner with Trudeau. That's just who he is. He may say something tonight if they walk out and talk to the press that we had a constructive conversation, but he'll probably be back on Truth Social later tonight saying Canada's going to bend to our will, which is a hell of a way to have great relationships with your neighbor.
Chip Felkel, Republican strategist, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. It's good to speak with you today, sir. Have a good evening.
Happy to be here. I didn't want to have to sit in that restaurant any longer anyway.
All right. Well, you can either leave or go back for dessert. The choice is yours, sir. But thanks for taking the time to talk with us here in Canada.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it,
Have
sir.
a good night.
All right. All right. Rosie, Chip makes an interesting point just about the whole volatility of it all, and the sort of the Donald Trump playbook of sort of always attack, never retreat, and no matter the outcome, claim victory. And that's kind of the dynamic that the Prime Minister and Minister LeBlanc have walked into tonight in Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah, and I think, again, just to go back to the political risk, like you heard Pierre Poilievre all through this week, certainly not choosing a Team Canada approach for this, right? Certainly not falling into what Conservatives thought was a trap, frankly, that the Prime Minister was trying to set for him, but talking about how Canada needs a leader with a backbone, with brains. He was taking stabs at the Prime Minister's strengths all through question period, all week long. And he was pointing to and questioning his ability to handle President Trump.
Because he's lost control,
that's
he kept
right.
saying. Yeah.
Because, and I think that's for a real reason. I do think that there is also a risk for Pierre Poilievre, because there is the possibility here for the Liberals to reclaim a narrative and an agenda about a competent government that knows how to handle someone who's volatile. I don't know that they're going to do that, but I think the Conservatives are quite aware that that's a possibility. But to go back to the risk for the Prime Minister, the risk is that he walks away from this dinner and that he suddenly embodies everything that Pierre Poilievre is talking about, right? A weakened leader, someone with no backbone, who does, do or say whatever Donald Trump needs in order to get some sort of agreement from him. So the framing of the meeting is really critical, both from the President and the Prime Minister and his staff in terms of what they are able to say they accomplished, and then what happens in all the weeks that still have to come before the president-elect can actually do any of the things that he's threatening. And I'll just go back to, if I can, to who is there and how this unfolded, because it is quite extraordinary, right? For the Prime Minister to stop in Ottawa briefly, pick up staff and Minister LeBlanc. I don't know how many staff are there. Certainly the Chief of Staff and the Deputy Chief of Staff, I would imagine. Fly somewhere without any of us knowing. I think it was you who first asked, I think he's going to Mar-a-Lago, and then to appear there and have this now complete blackout from the Prime Minister's office with no information being shared in order for this meeting to happen in some sort of situation where it is not just about the media asking questions in the press. Like, they are really trying to control how much of this is leaking out. And probably that is also the request of the president-elect.
Well, I was going to say, Aaron, I get the sense from my conversation with Josh Wingrove earlier, who is in Florida to cover President-elect Trump, that people have been coming in and out of there, and it's all quiet, and it's because the Trump team kind of wants it that way. Just your thoughts on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also, though, it's a reminder of what they were like, the Trudeau team, from 2017, 2016, really, through 2021, which was very disciplined about what they said in public, about the information that went out. They were not publicizing all of their efforts. Up until maybe sort of some of the outreach on NAFTA, it was a very sort of focused, organized campaign. People can argue about the results of it one way or the other, but it was the Liberals showing an ability to kind of be disciplined. And I think, to a certain extent, you're probably seeing a bit of that. It actually kind of reminds me a bit more of Trudeau in his early leadership years, when he would kind of make sudden moves and big gestures without kind of, setting it up or forewarning. So there's a bit of that to it, I think, too.
Right.
But I think this really does seem like an attempt to kind of proactively get on the front foot with this issue, and not wait until January, whatever the inauguration day is,
January 20th. Yeah.
And see what happens then. I think this is a pretty strident move to get this going and try to be proactive and figure out some solutions moving forward.
Yeah, a 25% tariff threat has a way of focusing the mind and creating some urgency. There's no question about it. Okay, but speaking of Team Trudeau, the first time around, Hassan Yussuff was kind of part of that team. He's now an independent senator. He was part of the NAFTA Council back in the first Trump presidency, back when Hassan Yussuff was the president of the Canadian Labour Congress, and he joins us here now. Senator, it's good to see you again. I just wonder, what are your thoughts on this move? The Prime Minister taking his public safety minister and some senior staff and jetting off to Mar-a-Lago to meet with the president-elect in a week of tariff threats.
I think it's excellent news. I think the country will feel relief. I think the Premier should be feeling relieved. And more importantly, I think that the fact that the two men is going to sit down and have a dialogue with each other so we can understand what is it that the President is concerned about in terms of our relationship, and more importantly, how we can strengthen the relationship going forward. So I think I see this as a very, very positive thing, and hopefully the meeting will end in a positive way and maybe have some work to do, of course, going forward. But I think tonight will set the tone as to what could happen over the next number of months as the president and his team, of course, take office.
The issue is the same, right? With Donald Trump threatening to sort of upend the economic relationship between the three countries on the continent, between Canada and the U.S. specifically from our perspective. But the reasons are different, right? Before it was NAFTA was unfair, it was a bad deal. Now it's border security and national security, right? Migrants and fentanyl. How do you respond to that? Wab Kinew makes the point that you're not going to argue your way out of it. So how do you respond to it if you can't convince him the facts of the matter are different than what he says?
Well, as long as this president is in office, I think we should expect the unexpected. He will say things and do things that is irrational from a traditional relationship. And we should expect that. We should also be prepared. We have to respond in a rational, intelligent way, and that's how we're going to get them to appreciate. I mean, if there's an issue with our border, I think it's more of, people are coming across in the Canadian side and then Canadians, people from Canada going across the United States. I mean, clearly we've got a lot of guns coming across from the border. A lot of innocent Canadians have died as a result of that. I think the president may want to hear from that and what they can do to try to put some stop to that. But in terms of our bilateral relationship, which these two things touch on, I think this is a constant effort we have to work on to ensure we're not taking unnecessary harm to destroy each other's economy, but at the same time to create unnecessary attention within our country. But this president, I think we will learn over the next 4 years, will continue to create those tensions. We have to manage that.
So just final question, Senator. The politics in the country, federally, provincially, and certainly within the House of Commons, are very different than they were the first time round, when there was a cross-partisan, NAFTA Council to respond to the threat that the renegotiation was to the country. Do you think the politics will allow the sort of Team Canada approach that people say is needed to come to fruition here, given the stakes on the table?
Well, I think the fact that the premiers met this week with the Prime Minister and they had a good, frank discussion, I think will lead to recognition. The only way we're going to resolve our differences with the United States is that we have to work together, regardless of our political stripes or background or industry or whoever you might represent. I think it's fundamental to the country. The last time around, what the Americans learned, the Canadians were united, they were focused, they were disciplined. And to a large extent, I think it led to a successful renegotiations of NAFTA, in which both countries benefited significantly. I think this time around, recognizing that there are some aspect of renegotiations of NAFTA, the renewal of things that they may want to fix with Mexico, and maybe some things that we may also want to bring to the table. But at the same time, I think there needs to be recognition around the premiers, mayors, and our political leadership from all political parties that we have to come together and show a united front, because that's about the economic interest of the country. There are millions of jobs at stake, and I think those people are starting to worry. I talked to a number of labor leaders this week who are significantly stressed about what this could do to the economy if Trump was to impose 25% tariff.
No, there's no question about that.
We've got an opportunity here.
Yeah. Well, there's enough anxiety to go around on this one, Senator. Hassan Yussuff, independent senator and former president of the Canadian Labour Congress. Thanks for joining us on short notice on a Friday night. We appreciate it, sir.
Thanks, my friend. All the best. Good night.
All right. Thank you.